Well, good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the North Valley Seventh-day Adventist Church, one of our rare seminars. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. It's not working? How's that? Maybe I just don't have it close enough. Thank you. This evening and tomorrow, we have a very special event. We have got an international speaker that has come and volunteered to come in and present to us a whole program on how to live a wonderful, healthy life. And we have titled it, Boost Your COVID Immunity Naturally. And I want everybody to know right up front, if it's good for COVID and being immunized against it, it's good for everything. Once you get your immunity built up, then your body can fight off disease. If your immunity is down and shot, you're not going to fight off disease. I don't care what kind of drugs they give you. So, we are looking very forward to having Mr. John Kelly. He's an MD, he's an MPH, a lifestyle medicine specialist. He's an adjunct fellow of Loma Linda University, and I could spend another 5 minutes going over all his certifications, degrees, and authority. But I'm not going to do that. I think we all would rather hear him than me. So at this time, Dr. Kelly, come on up here, and let's hear what you have to say, because I think all of us would like to enjoy life and not be spending our time setting up doctor appointments and taking pills.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
There you go.
Okay. Good evening. Can you hear me all right? Is my mic working okay? Great. Glad you could come and be with us. And thank you, Charlie, for that kind introduction. Yeah, so people were saying to me when they heard that we were going to talk about boosting your COVID immunity, says, well, you know, COVID's over. So is COVID over? No. And no one at risk? No. Actually, in some of the world, they're actually still having increasing death rates. So in the U.S., thank God, it is largely declining. But it's not over. And so we want to talk about, in this series, and Barbara is going to be helping, Barbara Sparks Davis will be helping with the presentations tomorrow. So let's see. Tonight, our first presentation is entitled, Your Genes and Your Risk of COVID. Did you know that your genes have a large impact on your risk of COVID? Of course, in one sense, you might say, well, I guess so. I mean, your genes have determined all kinds of things. But you're going to find out that many of the effects that your genes have on your risk of COVID, you can change. So that's the exciting part, is about how to turn down your risk of COVID by changing gene expression. We're going to talk about that and a few other things. Yes, so I give these presentations to medical audiences and others, and so, as Charles said, you can ignore all this stuff here, but credentials matter when you go to talking to academics or doctors. So that's why, and so, I'll try to, if anything you don't understand, if I use terms that you don't understand, please just ask me to say it in another way, simpler terms. But so that we know where we're going, I have 4 learning objectives for tonight. I want us to understand the typical comorbidities or illnesses that people have that are associated with poor COVID outcomes. And number 2, we're going to understand the beneficial effects of lifestyle changes that affect our risk of COVID, risk of getting it, plus our risk of having a serious case or maybe dying from it. Third, we want to know the typical results of intensive lifestyle changes. There's a number of things that change, and not just affecting COVID, but other things. And number 4, if I have time, I will describe an actual example of someone who made intensive lifestyle changes. So, let's get started. How will you spend your last 10 years?
What will your last 10 years look like? Will you be quick enough for a game of tag with your grandchild? Strong enough to embrace every moment? Will you grow old with vitality? Or get old with disease? It's time to decide.
That's right, it is time. So, our first learning objective is to understand the typical diseases or conditions that are associated with greater risk of having COVID infection or poor outcomes. So it turns out that most of the comorbidities, most of the conditions that increase our risk of COVID are actually chronic diseases. They're chronic conditions. And so that includes things like type 2 diabetes, or used to be called adult onset diabetes, chronic lung disease, COPD, emphysema, other, even bronchitis, chronic bronchitis, and cardiovascular disease having to do with our heart and circulatory system, and obesity in general. There's a citation there. This was from the April of 2020. I have a more recent one here with a lot more numbers. This, sorry, I had to put the citation sideways, but it's from December of 2020. So, and look at what they found. Basically, everything on this, everything listed here, this is results for assessing factors associated with in-hospital mortality. So this was the people who were admitted with COVID and the ones that died. And they were looking at what led to, what was associated. Well, bottom line is that, here's the bottom line. This is what we call a p-value. This is the risk factor, this is the chance that this is a random result. And if it's less than 0.05, it's statistically significant. So everything on here except two things. These two things are 0.07. They're a little over. So all of this, heart attack, congestive heart failure, stroke, cerebral vascular diseases, stroke, chronic pulmonary disease, dementia, all of these things highly significantly associated with mortality for those that had COVID and were admitted to the hospital. The two that are not quite statistically significant was AIDS and hypertension, but still that was a risk. It just, in a larger sample, this probably would have attained to statistical significance. Anyway, so then another study here, a little bit of information. Let's see, when was this one? This is, I think, 2021. I don't have the month, but it was just published here a couple of months ago. And what they're looking at here is, well, let's look at a bigger, blow it up a little bit more. This is the illnesses or comorbidities that are associated with altered adaptive immune response to the virus. So what this is, they're actually now looking at what kind of sickness or illness you have that impairs your immune system and makes it not able to fight off the virus. So we're getting more and more specific with these things. And here's what, so diabetes, it was those who, since I changed, let's look at this column so you'll have it. So this was the ones that were not hospitalized, and these were the hospitalized, okay? So people that were sick and needed hospitalization versus not. And the risk was 5 times as great of hospitalization if you had diabetes. Heart disease, it's infinite. There's no way to calculate this. This is 0 versus 2. Hypertension was a third greater risk, and other conditions were 12 times the risk. So anyway, the point is, chronic disease, not only do we now know that it increases your risk of getting infected with COVID or being hospitalized with it, but we now know that it also does that by impairing your body's ability to have an immune response, a proper immune response to the virus. Let me point out something here. It's interesting. I mean, I realize the typical layperson is not trained in the immune system, and so this may pass you by if I don't point it out. But the adaptive immune response is a particular part of the immune system that fights infection inside of a cell. The natural killer cells and the non-adaptive portion of the immune system, that attacks anything that's foreign in your body. So this, we do know, right, that COVID infects cells. That's where it gets inside the cell and starts producing more copies of itself. And that's why this is such a problem. We need that adaptive immune response to fight this off. Now, here was an interesting study. It was it's published in May, if I'm not mistaken. It was just in the last few weeks. I saw this one. And its title is Plant-Based Diets, Pescatarian, that's fish diets, and COVID-19 Severity, a population-based case control study in 6 countries. So basically they took almost 3,000 frontline healthcare workers from 6 countries. You can see them there: France, Germany, Italy, Spain, the UK, and the USA. And of those 3,000 frontline workers, those individuals who reported that they ate or followed a plant-based diet or a fish diet that were higher in vegetables, legumes, and nuts, and lower in poultry and red and processed meat, of those, they found that 73% and 59% lower odds of this moderate or severe. In other words, they were more likely to have a mild case if they were infected. And so 73% was for the plant-based diet, 59% was the fish diet that was also high in plants and low in red and processed meats. So then their conclusion here: plant diets or pescatarian diets, healthy patterns which may be considered for protection against severe COVID. What I thought was interesting is that they didn't, and the reason that they didn't publish the numbers of does this protect against infection, not just against mortality or serious infection, is because they didn't have a control group to work with. So all they could do was look at frontline workers and those that got severe COVID versus those that didn't. They would have to have had another group to be able to tell us, is this protective from getting infected or not? I'm pretty sure it is. Okay, so now we're to our second learning objective, which is to understand the beneficial effects of lifestyle changes that also affect our COVID risk. So, going to give you a little background here first. This is Time magazine from 2010. That's a long time ago. And on this issue, the whole issue was about what they call the new science of epigenetics, and how the epigenetics reveals the choices that we make can change our genes and those of our kids too. And so Sally reminds me that I need to always, when I'm showing this slide, explain epigenetics just carefully here. So I think we all know what genetics is. It has to do with our genes. But epigenetics is about, epi is upon, so there are molecules, there are substances that actually sit on top of our genes that control, they're like the switch, like the light switch. They turn the gene on or they turn it off. They make it active or they make it inactive. And you probably know that already, that not all of the genes in your cells are on at the same time. Just common sense would tell us that. Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about it, because the more we understand, if we understand this, it'll be much easier to understand how you can change your risk of COVID and likelihood of infection by your lifestyle. So, first I want to tell you just a couple of amazing, okay, so the next few slides are to sort of dazzle us about how powerful is this, okay? So this was published in Cell, a leading journal about this kind of science. in 2010. So it's over a decade ago. And what they did, in a nutshell, was these researchers were able to change the switches on the genes in skin cells and turn that cell into a heart cell. So let me just, so they took fibroblasts, that's the official name for a skin cell, and they took this fibroblast cell and changed the gene switches in that cell and transformed it into a heart cell, a cardiomyocyte. And as the next slide, they say that when they transplanted those transformed cells into the hearts of mice, they differentiated and began to work with all the other heart cells. They were contracting. They were heart cells. So that usually boggles our mind, but I'm going to show you in a minute a little bit more. But before I do, one more little dazzle here. So this is again from the journal Cell. This was an article published in 2017. That's more recent. And what does it say there? Fasting mimicking diet promotes blah, 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 regeneration to reverse diabetes. So, you know, all this nitty-gritty is not a big deal. If you don't catch that, it doesn't matter. But don't miss the key point, that by a particular kind of diet that they fed these diabetic mice cured their diabetes. Now, if I would have said that 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, I would have been laughed out of town by academics and medical types and many lay people as well. But it's actually a fact. So a 4-day fasting mimicking diet, they actually worked out all these steps, how it turns on these switches. SOX17 and PDX1 and NG3 are epigenetic factors, okay? So, you know, they don't give them a name like John and Joey and Stevie. They have these acronyms and so forth. And I don't try to memorize them at all. Believe me, I don't even know why they use those abbreviations. But these are basically switches that are changing genes in the cell. Excuse me. And so what did they say? That it caused this regeneration of insulin production in the beta cells, that's the cells of your pancreas that make, resembling what was observed during pancreatic development. So, you know, when you were in your mother's womb and were developing, your pancreas was developing during this period of time, and the beta cells were produced and so on. Well, they've actually seen that the similar process can be induced by what did they do? What miracle drug? Fasting mimicking diet. Yeah, it was food. Fasting mimicking diet. Food was able to induce a similar process in an adult mice's pancreas that we see when they are in the embryo developing stage. That's amazing. And so what they say here is that these fasting mimicking cycles restore insulin secretion and glucose homeostasis, meaning blood sugar is normal, stays in the normal range, in both type 2 and type 1 diabetes mice. So obviously this is an earth-shaking. There are other researchers have now reproduced this. I've got other articles in my files. This work has been done in other laboratories as well. So we know this is a fact. And then what they did was they took human type 1 diabetic cells that are in the laboratory. This is not in vivo, it's what we call in vitro, okay? It's in the lab, in glass. It's not in a living human being. They haven't done this in living human beings yet, but I'm sure it'll be done. And what they found was that a very similar process, okay? This is all medical scientific mumbo jumbo, so don't. But basically what it's saying is that they were able to show that the same kind of thing happens in human type 1 diabetic cells. So there's great hope that this kind of work is going to lead to, well, let's let them just say it in their own words. This is from the article. These results indicate that a fasting mimicking diet promotes the reprogramming of pancreatic cells to restore insulin generation in the islets, okay, from type 1 diabetes patients, humans, and reverse both type 1 and type 2 diabetics in mouse models. Phenotype is just a physical characteristic. Yes, sir? Yeah, okay. I have, I'll try to remember to have those slides in my next talk. I have a set of slides that actually describes what it is. And so, but it's a particular way of giving the same amount of nutrients with less calories. So the calories, like in humans, they have a version now for human beings. It's a 5-day process, not 4. And you eat 1,300 calories the first day, and then you eat about 800 or 900 the next 4 days, and then you go back to whatever you normally eat. And it's interesting, because one of the key things, I don't want to get off on this, but one of the interesting things to me is that you do not want to fast continually. It's the fasting followed by normal eating, followed by fasting, followed by normal eating. It's the cycles that actually seems to induce this change. If you fast the mouse, endlessly, it doesn't work. You have to have fasting and then normal eating, then fasting. Isn't that interesting? Remember the rich young ruler came to Christ and he said, what did he say? I fast twice in the week, among other things. He said, Do you realize that in the Jewish culture and economy, it was common. Fasting weekly was routine. I think it would be very interesting to do a study like this using the fasting that was common in the Jewish system and see if we don't find similar benefits. But that's okay. So with those little, I got to go faster here. But that was to kind of get your attention and see that epigenetics is significant. It's powerful. It can turn a skin cell into a heart cell. It can cause a pancreas to develop new working beta cells. So let's do a little history now. So what you're looking at is an actual photograph taken when Watson and Crick, Dr. Watson, Dr. Crick, they're the ones that discovered and proved that deoxyribonucleic acid was the molecule of inheritance, okay, that had the genes. And this picture was when they won the Nobel Prize and they were given this. So I think this photo was taken in 1954, but I don't have the exact date. Hello? Yes. This is deoxyribonucleic acid. You can see why we call it DNA, right? It's a lot easier to say DNA. So, and then another thing. So that was one milestone. How about this one? So this was about 2010 or so, or 11, that the Human Genome Project. And there's Dr. Francis Collins. He's a little older now, if you've seen him on TV recently. But anyway, he was in charge of this project for the NIH, and they sequenced the human genome for the first time. And they found that there were 3 billion of those base pairs. Let me just show you what that is. Each one of these rungs on this twisted ladder is a base pair, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like the rungs on the ladder. And there was 3 billion of them. That was in one cell. You have trillions of cells. And someone has calculated that if you put all this, and it's about 2 meters long, so in each cell. So if you were to put these molecules somehow end to end, supposedly the DNA in one human being could reach to the moon and back. But anyway, it's huge. Just unbelievable. 25,000 or so genes, lots of variations. In fact, most of us are familiar with using this DNA variations for what we call DNA testing, right? To identify if that's your tissue or not. So the difference between one person and another is greater than fingerprints. So you have a better, you can actually go by fingerprints and make a mistake. Did you know that? There are cases of people have fingerprints that are similar enough that you can't tell one from the other. It very rarely happens, but it does happen. But with the DNA, the odds are far less likely that there would be. You can never say it would never happen, but it's very, very unlikely. Okay. So, now a little biology review. So if you can, for a moment, go back to your high school or college biology class. So here we have someone holding these 3 little chinky pins. Actually, they're not. They are animals. These are little hedgehogs. And I want you to think for a moment, where did these hedgehogs come from? They were all out of the same litter. They're quite young. Well, an egg was fertilized with a sperm, okay? So their biological mother ovulated, had an egg. In humans, it was traveling down the fallopian tube, and then the sperm comes in contact with it, and the first one that comes in contact actually enters the cell. Did you know that after the first one enters, there's a special change that takes place in the wall of the ovum, and it doesn't matter how many more million bump into it, that's it. It's already taken. So you get half of the DNA comes from the mother's egg and half from the sperm. Now you have a full set, right? 23 pairs in the case of human beings. So what happens? Well, by the way, that almost always happens in the fallopian tube, not in the uterus. It happens early on. Can happen in the uterus, but rarely does. And then this thing is called a zygote. It's one cell, right? What does it do? Well, it does what all human cells do. It divides, becomes two. Only two choices. It either dies or divides. So if it dies, you never know that it happened. You don't even have a miscarriage because there was nothing to miscarry. It just goes away. But if it lives, it divides, makes two cells, each one of those divide, and by the time it reaches, the average size is by the time it reaches the uterus, it is already has quite a few cells, many cells. Now, I want you to think about, where did those cells come from? If they all came from the first one cell, right? So what does that tell us? It tells us that every cell in your body has the same DNA. Every cell in your body has a complete set of the same DNA because it all came from the first cell. And every cell gets a copy of the whole thing. So now you can understand why it's so important to have switches. Because if we didn't have switches, we would just be a blob of something. I don't know what it would be, but it would not have eyes, it wouldn't have ears. It would just all be the same. But instead, we have all these different kinds of cells. Some makes an ear, some makes a toe, some makes a brain. Well, you know what? I'm going to quote Dr. Whitelaw. She's an expert on this, and she says we don't inherit DNA. No, we don't. She says we inherit chromosomes. See, that's that little thing that's like an X whenever you say that we inherit chromosomes, and chromosomes are only half DNA. The other half of the chromosome is actually this other stuff, this epigenetic stuff, switches, things that control the genes and tell them what to do. You know, one of my friends, Dr. Deal, likes to say the epigenetics is like the jockey on the horse. See, so the jockey rides the horse, and supposedly, apparently you have to have a jockey. Horses don't win races without a jockey. I'm not sure why, but anyway. Well, so DNA has to have this jockey, this epigenetics sitting on top of it to control it. So here's a couple examples. You know, you don't have to. There's the chromosome I was talking about, the X thing. That's how they usually show a chromosome, is just an X. And then it's made out of this chromatin, which is rolled up DNA. And here's a couple of switches that we've discovered. One of them is on the DNA. One of them is on these histone proteins. You know, we don't have time to go into this, and I have to be careful I don't spend too much time. But to me, this kind of biology is absolutely fascinating. I just love it. I couldn't tell you near as much as I would love to show you and tell you about. But DNA, when it's all rolled up and done into a chromosome, there's 4 different levels of organization. It's not only that it has the base pairs. Did you know that these two strands are not literally touching? They don't literally touch and have a covalent bond. They're simply next to each other. And so anyway, but they're all coiled up, and you can see here, when they're tightly rolled up on this, it looks like a Bayer aspirin to me. It's got like these, but anyway, when it's rolled up on this little histone, that's not really, you can see that it would be impossible to transcribe this piece of DNA because you can't get a hold of it. But if you put this epigenetic factor on a tail, it causes these proteins to separate and it exposes the DNA. So now we can make a copy of it. Transcribe it is what we call it. Do you know what it makes when let's see who the biologists are. So what is produced when that gene is active or transcribed? Messenger RNA. Now, I thought you might find it interesting because the immunizations and the vaccines today are man-made messenger RNA. But that's what it makes. It makes a piece of messenger RNA. Okay. Boy, this is... So the epigenome is this whole thing. See, the genome is the entire set of your genes. Well, the epigenome is the entire set of your gene switches, is what that's talking about. And so we inherited these from our parents. So when you were born, you not only inherited the genes, you inherited what? Switches. What do you know about a switch? A switch is either on or off or partway on. Anyway, so you inherited gene switch settings from your parents as well. So when you were born, you not only had genes, but you had gene switches that were set by what? Set by your mother and your grandmother, father and grandfather. Did you know, I'm going to run out of time, but that's all right. Did you know, because Sally, my wife, insists that I always tell this, it is very interesting. Did you know that we talked about the egg from the biological mother getting fertilized. Did you know that those eggs are produced in the ovary in the first 3 or 4 months of embryonic development? So while you were in your mother's womb, if you're a female, you females, your ovaries were populated. The cells, the eggs that you have, were produced. And who was nourishing you during those 3 months or 4 months? Your mother. So her diet. But, so you were in your mother's womb when those were produced. However, where was she when your egg was produced? Well, she was in your grandmother's womb. So your grandmother's lifestyle and diet affected the switches that you inherited when you were born. Anyway, it's interesting, tremendously interesting to me how this multi-generational effect. I don't have time to go into it tonight. There's all kinds of amazing stuff that have been discovered about this. So let's move on, though, because we just want to, this is just to get you to understand what I'm going to talk to you about in a few minutes. So these genes are turned on and off by effects in our environment. The largest one, I already had it in the previous one, was what? Food. It's what we eat. Our diet turns out to have more effect on gene switches than anything that's been discovered so far. So I want to now show you real quick 3 studies. All right, so the agouti mouse is here. This is a special mouse that has been genetically modified. It's at great effort. They were able to insert into the genome for this mouse the genes that cause obesity, heart disease, diabetes, all kinds of these diseases that human beings get, so that they could study those diseases in a mouse. And I'm not here to talk about animal rights or anything. I'm telling you what they do. Some people get upset and so forth. But this has been done. And so when the researchers who were studying epigenetics were looking for a way to see if the diet of the mother could affect the gene switches in utero, they thought of this mouse because, see, she's got special genes that make her obese and diabetic and everything. It says, maybe could we give her a special diet and her baby would be like a normal mouse? Well, lo and behold, the ripples are still coming from the research that they did there. This was published the first time in 1998, but it is still on their website because it's still so earth-shaking. But this is actually the offspring from this mouse. Now, if this was a human situation, we would, of course, have a paternity suit. That is definitely not my kid. I mean, it doesn't even look like her. The coat color is different and everything, right? All the things that were programmed into her or engineered into her have all been turned off by what? By food fed to her during pregnancy. And so, in fact, they did the DNA testing because this is research, and this mouse has the genes for obesity, heart disease, diabetes. It has them, but they are, that's right, you're making me proud. They're turned off. They were switched off. So that shows you how powerful it is to turn off a gene. It's like it doesn't exist. However, over a period of time, let's see what they had to say. The effects of this were evident for 3 to 4 generations. So if this mouse was fed an unhealthy diet, those gene switches would turn on, and it would start to get some of those effects. All right, so that's one study. I want to show you real quickly another one. Now, this is in rats, so we're moving up a little bit here. And these are wild-type rats. They haven't had any special work done to their genes. They're just like any old lab rats you might buy for, I think there's like a dozen for $10, I think they used to be. Well, anyway, so this was published in 2008, and what did it say? Maternal high-fat diet and fetal programming increased proliferation of hypothalamic type-producing neurons, brain cells, that increase risk for overeating and obesity. What they did was they studied a wild rat that was fed a high-fat diet, about 55% of calories from fat, those who want to know the numbers, and they traced what was happening to the developing baby in the uterus. And they found that there was a gene on chromosome 3 that in the brain, developing brain, caused there to be increased production of neurons. So it's like, wait a minute, what did we just say? The mother's diet changed the baby's brain anatomy. Yeah, the mother's diet changed the anatomy of the baby's brain. It turns out that the neurons that were being produced were hypothalamus. They go to the base of the brain. It's where we, basically it's intrinsic innate characteristics. This is the place that controls things like basic food drive, sex drive, sleep drive. You know, it's not the thinking part, it's the instincts. And so then after this baby was born, what were the characteristics? We call them phenotype. What were the characteristics? Well, the characteristics were that it had higher blood lipids, so its cholesterol and triglycerides were high. It had a higher food intake. It ate more food than than a baby. What they compared it to was a baby from the same mother when she was fed a non-high-fat diet. What were the difference between the children born, or the rats? What do they call them things? Baby rats? Anyway, kits? Ratlets? I don't think so. I forgot. I think it might be kits. But anyway, whatever it is. Fat preference, early puberty onset, they started their families at a younger age, and higher body weight. So, there you have. So diet affected, turned off genes in the mice. Diet, a different kind of diet, turned on genes in the rat. So now let's graduate to the next level. Let's look at what happens in some men. So they did a study in men with prostate cancer. And these were men that agreed to take instead of surgery or radiation, they had a low-risk prostate cancer, and so they did a lifestyle program, and they changed mostly their diet. They didn't have surgery. They took samples. What they did was they took a needle biopsy of the prostate gland, and from that, at the beginning and at the end of 3 months, from that they could actually separate messenger RNA. Now, why would you want to do that? from what we've already talked about. If you look at the messenger RNA, what does that tell you? It tells you what genes are active, which ones are turned on. And so this was a way to actually measure with actual molecules in the tissue which genes were active, okay? So I've already talked about that part, that slide. This was, they had basically the same diet that the Ornish program uses for heart disease. They were using here with cancer. And well, I'll have a handout I can get you if you want to. I have a digital PDF that they can email to you. So here's where the money is of this study, you might say. And this is called the heat map. So what this is there's one column for each man over here at the beginning, and another column for each of those men after the 90 days or the 3 months. And each row is a different messenger RNA that they found, okay? The color at each one of these squares is dark if there was a lot of messenger RNA. It's light if there wasn't very much. So here you can see there was quite a bit, right? A little bit less. Here's much less. Then over here. But all you have to do, most people can just glance at this and see that this side is much darker than this side. So actually what they did when they counted these, there was over 450 genes that were turned down. They went from dark to light. There was about 50 that went from light to dark. And when they didn't even know what all these genes were, but some of them they recognized, and the ones that were being turned off, many of those they recognized were genes that cause cancer or make it worse. Some of the ones that were turned up, some they recognized as that were helpful to fight cancer. Anyway, so that was to look at the beneficial effects and how it affects the genes. Okay, so now let's talk about the results from an intensive lifestyle program. So we already talked about the intensive lifestyle changes and how it changes gene expression, okay? And we already cited this study here from Ornish. We also talked about the fasting mimicking diet and how it can cause beta cell neogenesis, okay? So two more things. I want you to look at the results of a 10-day lifestyle immersion and how it affects glucose and insulin, which has a lot to do with diabetes, heart disease, stroke, etc. And then we're going to look at some very low energy diet that causes remission of type 2 diabetes in individuals. So first, this one here. This was some research that I had the privilege of doing when I was working at Loma Linda in the Marshall Islands. The Marshall Islands have huge numbers of diabetics. About half of people above the age of 18 are pre-diabetic or diabetic. So half of their population is pre-diabetic or diabetic. The 80% of the admissions to the hospital are for avoidable complications of diabetes. So anyway, we did a study over there. Could we help stop this epidemic with lifestyle program? That's why it was called the Diabetes Wellness Project. Some of you may recognize this guy. This is known in some Adventist circles. That's Wes Youngberg, and he was working with us part of the time. He was in Guam at that time. He's now in Southern California. And over here's another face some might recognize. This is Brenda Davis. She was our head nutritionist. And and here's just some of our exercise machines. We didn't teach these people to exercise on machines. They can't afford it. What we used the machines was to measure their fitness. So we had we were trying to show them that their fitness was increasing as they would walk. This is what we call the compounding pharmacy, also known as the kitchen. And so that's where we compounded the treatments, and we were teaching them to cook. These are all Marshallese people here in all these pictures except Wes and Brenda. Now this was the first group in that Marshall Islands study, and this was the first 10 days, okay? So we had, I think there was 20, I forget exactly how many, but 10 days. Now, we did not include weekends, so weekends are not included. So this was 10 days of treatment, but it was 14 days of time. Okay, well, 12 because anyway, there's 2 weekends in here. And you can actually see there's a little blip. But this is the morning fasting blood sugar, and here's what we call a regression line. And what this shows is that the average change in blood sugar was 74 milligrams per deciliter. That is the kind of change that you would typically have to use insulin to get. There's almost no medicine that would give you 74-point reduction. And so when I've showed this slide in some medical conferences, they've come to me afterwards and said, what did you do? Did you use an insulin pump, or how did you do that? I said, well, actually, the 2 people that were on insulin, we had to stop because they were hypoglycemic. We used something more powerful than an insulin pump. What is that? Lifestyle. We changed their diet. We had them exercise every day. You know when the most important time for a diabetic to exercise is? Immediately after eating. It should not be, don't run, but you should have, we teach them, your meal is not finished until you have taken a stroll if you're diabetic. Anyway, so, and then here, this is the one from the very low energy diet. This is published in Lancet, February 2018. And I'm sorry, this citation is not needed. I'm not going to show you anything about that one. Well, I guess I do. I'm comparing it over here. Well, anyhow, so this is, in their study in England, 46% of the type 2 diabetics that were put into this primary care-led weight management for remission of type 2 diabetes had remission of type 2 diabetes. Okay, and in their case, they were saying they had to have normal blood sugar for at least 2 months without any medication on board. That was the way they described their remission. But look what they found something very interesting. If you look at the amount of weight loss, less than 5 pounds, 5 to 10, I'm sorry, these are kilograms. Less than 5 kilograms, 5 to 10, a kilogram is 2.2 pounds. So this would be, 5 times, that would be less than 11, and then so on. Anyway, 15 or more, that was their target. They were trying to get people to lose up to 15 kilograms. Those that achieved that had 86% had remission of type 2 diabetes. That's comparable or better than bariatric surgery in many cases. Bariatric surgery, 60 to 80-some%. Yeah, so I'm not going to talk about the look ahead. Now this is a convenient sample of 55 patients that I had when I was at Black Hills. We had an 18-day lifestyle program. We call it, that's what we Adventists are used to calling it. We call it an intensive therapeutic lifestyle change immersion program. And so you're not going to, you don't need to, that's just to show you. I'm going to look at pieces of it, okay? So if we look, this is important. This is what produces those changes. This is where we measure their before and after food. Servings per week of cholesterol. The 41 people that we had data on, the average was 18 servings a week. And then we serve almost no cholesterol. The reason there's some that have cholesterol is they don't all eat only what we give them. And but you can see we changed the amount of cholesterol, amount of fat, the amount of sweets, the sodas. They were drinking 19 were drinking sodas, and the average was almost 3, and it went down to little or nothing. Anyway, water went up, and so forth. Exercise. Anyway, so we measured their lifestyle changes that they made. And this shows that the diabetes measures drop amazingly. Here's the percent change, okay? So if you look at the glucose for those that were diabetic, they had a 30% drop. Everybody overall was almost 10%. The insulin was dropping at the same time. Now, you know enough about insulin and glucose to know, right, that if you want to lower your glucose, your sugar, you take insulin and it lowers it, right? So what does it mean then when you reduce your amount of insulin and your blood sugar still goes down? How can that happen? What's happening is you're reversing your insulin resistance. You're reversing the disease. when you reverse diabetes, your insulin level will go down and your glucose will go down as well, because your pancreas is perhaps making insulin, but but if it was the insulin was being made by your pancreas, the total level wouldn't go down. So what's happening is your body needs less insulin to control your blood sugar. What would be one simple way, by the way, to make that happen? Exercise. I know you weren't expecting that, but exercise. You know, I have a friend who's an ER doctor, trained with Mayo, so he's very well trained. And you know what he uses to bring blood sugar down from patients that have high blood sugar in the ER? If they're ambulatory, he walks them. He says, I can get their blood sugar down faster by walking them than by giving them insulin, because insulin takes a little time to act. Anyway, so, all right. Also, metabolic syndrome and heart disease measures come down, okay? So I'm not going to go into the great details on it, just to tell you that these things improve as well. Yes? So diabetes is where you have elevated blood glucose. That's really all it takes, is if you have 2 or more measures of an elevated blood sugar or elevated A1C test, you can be diagnosed as diabetic. But to be diagnosed for metabolic syndrome, you have to have at least 3 out of 5 things present. Okay, so there's 5 criteria and you have to have at least 3 or more of those present to be on more than one occasion to be diagnosed as metabolic syndrome. All right, so those include a high triglycerides above 150. If it's above that, then it's elevated. It's a high waist to hip circumference. It's a high blood pressure, if I'm not mistaken. You know, oh, you know these things. Okay. See if I can get them right then. Okay, good. There's an elevated, I believe, elevated blood sugar as well. And there's a 5th one. So, anyway, maybe you can tell us. Because if you tell me, I might recognize it. It's okay. Anyway, so there's any 3 of those 5. Oh, wait. No, I was going to say, do I have it on one of my slides? I don't. Okay. I don't think I have time to do this one, but I was going to show, I do have the information to show you that we've actually done a lifestyle immersion program in a local church. And we did it with because Sally and I, we do these all over, I can literally say all over the world. But anyway, so we've done these in Lithuania, we've done them in other places around the country and around the globe. Mostly in this country, by all means. But the point is, we realized, hey, if we could go over to Lithuania, we don't speak Lithuanian, we didn't have any idea what stores were available, we had no idea what kind of food, we were taking food with us, and at the airport they took it away. So, you know, if we can go over there and do an immersion lifestyle program and reverse diabetes. We had one person who dropped his cholesterol over 100 points. So we know it works, even if you don't speak the language. So anyway, so we thought, well, if it works everywhere, why not do it in a local church? And so we did. But I don't have time to go into that because I'm going to run out of time and go into your question time. If you decide you want to ask questions about this, we'll come back to it. But anyway, and here's the little chart showing what we did each day. Okay, we started off on Sunday, and then what we did each day: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then the next week. Okay, so it was parts of 11 days, but we called it a 10-day program. And we had the graduation, okay, banquet over here on Thursday, and if you look at this, you'll see that what was it we were using? We were using the CHIP program. Why are we using the CHIP program? Because the CHIP program is like having Hans Deal and a couple of other people in a little container, like a Jack in the Box. And you open the box, and they get up and they talk very intelligently about exactly the same thing every time. You know exactly what they're going to say. You know how they're going to say it, and so anyway, we like using video material if it's high quality, and that's what we think. The new CHIP program, it's all been redone, and it's very good. Anyway, that's one of our main things is we use the CHIP lectures along with some live lectures. Okay, so, and it was also a training program. We don't just hold the lifestyle intervention to help the church members or their community with health. We use them then as patients for training other members how to do natural remedy treatments. So we taught hydrotherapy and so forth. This was, boy, this is a little hard to see. But anyway, this was the results. And you'll see these are the amount of change in different things. So we had some amazing drops. This is insulin resistance. So we had 36% drop in insulin resistance in this group. We had, 33% drop in inflammation, high sensitivity CRP. And the Beck score, depression score, those who had a Beck depression score that was indicated depression dropped by 49%. Anyway, so you can do an intensive lifestyle program in a local church and have similar results that you would get if you traveled somewhere to some lifestyle program. Keep that in mind, because that was what I think I originally mentioned that I would be willing to do. So the last thing, oh wait, I might finish on time, is to describe an actual example of someone who made changes. So this is an actual data from a real person, and just to make it, you could relate to it, I chose one that happened right here in the Roanoke area. Of course, I can't usually tell you who it is, but in this case, I can tell you who it is because I have permission from this person to use their name. But anyway, some of you know about the Rocky Mount Lifestyle Health Center down in Rocky Mount. I had the privilege of being involved in the beginnings of that. Actually, I'm still on the board. And it started off as basically an outpatient lifestyle program with a health food store for the purpose of educating people about buying healthy food. It has sort of been, now it's a little bit more, I would say the health food store is more mainly what it does, and they also do some lifestyle programs, health education programs. So, the patient that we treated there had heart disease. So this is just a simulated echocardiogram, but it shows you with ultrasound. I mean, most people are familiar with ultrasound when they think about a baby, a pregnancy, and so they use the ultrasound. And nowadays they even take pictures, right? So if you don't get your ultrasound picture of the baby, you're not up to speed. But anyway, so you can use ultrasound to visualize living tissue. And that's what we do with the heart. It's called an echocardiogram. All right? So this patient had, well, let's just look at the report. And this is Charles, and he is a relative. That is my brother, actually. Some of you know him. And in 2006, he had a cardiologist, Dr. Spady, who did an echocardiogram. And here's what he said. He says, see, a stress echocardiogram was obtained. And he has an abnormal stress echo suggestive of inferior ischemia, several risk factors for ischemic heart disease. He had high lipids, family history, and a long-standing lower extremity edema. And so what was the plan that he had? After reviewing everything, we have recommended he undergo coronary angiography with intervention if indicated. In plain English, he was going to get a stent. They're going to do an angiogram. If they find a narrowing, they're going to put a stent. Well, Charles was not a very cooperative patient because he said, I don't want a piece of metal put in my heart. And and he says, I'm going to call my brother. He's a doctor. So he calls my older brother gives me a call and says, they say I might need to have a stent, but I don't want to have it. So what do I need to do I says, are you kidding? There's 9 of us kids. I says, can you imagine what the rest of the family will do to me if you die because I tell you don't need this? He says, I'm not telling you don't need this. He says, well, I thought you were a lifestyle medicine doctor. I said, I am a lifestyle medicine doctor, but you're my brother. And I know you. He says, no, I'm serious. I'll make changes. I'll make lifestyle changes. I'll become a vegetarian. It was like it was a death sentence or something. Yeah. Well, he says beer and pretzels, that's vegetarian. So, he wouldn't have to change much. But anyway, so he, no, he was really serious. And I figured out why he was so serious. Maybe you remind me later, I'll tell you the rest of the story. Why I now know why he was so dead serious. Well, serious. He didn't die. So he came. Well, first he tried to do it on his own. He says, well, so he became a vegetarian. And he really did. He quit eating meat and dairy and all that kind of stuff. He didn't. I think he occasionally might have had some cheese, I don't know. And his cholesterol came down about 20 points. So, it was only 100 points too high instead of 120 points too high. Anyway, so, it didn't make any real difference. It did come down some. So I said, well, you need to come to Rocky Mountain Lifestyle Center, and you can stay in our home and make it a residential program. So you can go through the program, and I figured if he lived in my home, I'd be able to see what he was eating besides what we fed him. So anyway, he and his wife came, and they went through our program, and then when he was finished, in fact, I think he did 2. Didn't they do twice? I can't remember. I think they did 2 of them. And so then it was time to go do what? He had to go get another echocardiogram because the reason he needed to have this problem cleared up. I'll tell you later why. He needed to have this heart disease problem cleared up. So we sent him in. It was 2 years later, actually. It was 2008 when he went back to get this, and it was Dr. Austin, who's a cardiologist here in the Roanoke area. Yeah. So I figured somebody might know him. But anyhow, and so what does he say? Well, let's blow this up. So he says the echo portion of the test was considered negative for ischemia. The patient has done well with lifestyle changes. What's the plan? Continue with diet and exercise and aspirin. Yeah, awesome. It was fantastic. Now, so let me explain then why this was so important. My brother had gotten religion. He had become a Mormon, and he had remarried, and his wife was a Mormon, and he met her in the church anyway. And he wanted to do what they call a mission. He wanted to go spend 2 years in the mission field as a Latter-day Saints. But the problem is that the mission board had him submit his medical records to see if he was fit, and when they saw that he had a diagnosis of ischemia and there was no treatment, they said, well, and this is in 2006, right? And so he said, I've got to fix that. So sure enough, after this report, they approved him, and he went to the foreign mission field, Canada, and served his 2-year mission. Yeah. So they were very excited, very happy. I'll say one other thing about what they did, because I think this is important. They walked every day about 4 miles. They were really set on achieving this goal. And I don't walk 4 miles every day. I would. I wish I did. It would be a good thing. And so they were really into it. All right, well, I think that's everything that I have. I'm happy to take any questions. We have 5 minutes over, so you have about 25 minutes if you have questions. Yes?
If you walk 4 miles a day, and you walk after his meal, so he's going to walk more than a mile at a time?
No, he didn't only walk after meals. He did stroll after meals. You see, you can count the miles from your stroll, but strolling, let me show you the difference. So when you walk, you should be walking at about a 4 miles per hour pace if you're able, and you should walk at about, and then you should walk slower for a little while. You should vary the rate, okay? But when you're strolling, you don't want to do that. You want to walk like this when you're strolling, okay? You want to walk like you were chatting with the president, okay? Just strolling along, talking to the president. Because you just ate and you do not want to actually draw all the blood from your digestive organs to your leg muscles. So you don't really want to be vigorous. And so you just stroll. In fact, you can stop every now and then and just talk to the president. You don't have to walk all the time. And, or whoever, may not be the president.
The object is to be moving.
The object is to be moving. Because they published a study that really is what made this become so obvious. They published an interesting study. It was done in Sweden, I think. And they knew that physical activity after a meal sends signals to your liver and your organs that actually change the way the calories are processed in your body. What the researchers thought, they were actually studying hormones, muscle hormones is what the study was about. And they created a chair that you could just sit in and it would move your arms and legs passively. So you could just fall asleep in this thing. In fact, some of the people did fall asleep. And what they found was that the chair produced almost the same amount of benefit as you actually moving yourself. It's just moving the muscles, the limbs, after a meal will produce hormone signals that are different than if you are simply still. So the last thing you want to do, and anybody who's worked in a medicine or in the ER knows, when do most people come in with their ischemic heart disease? It's in the evening, somewhere between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. typically, and they have had a nice big old meal, and they have sat down in the easy chair and watched something and fallen asleep until they woke up with chest pain. That's a very common way it happens. Anyway, so so strolling for 10, 15 minutes after a meal is very, very helpful. It helps keep the blood sugar. It's something called postprandial hyperglycemia. Okay, postprandial means after the meal. Hyper is high. Glycemia is glucose. So it means having high glucose after your meal. If you walk, you can drop that down considerably.
How long?
Will it stay, how long to drop it? Oh, again, yeah, that would be, shoot for 15 minutes of strolling, 10 to 15 minutes, yeah. Won't hurt to do 20, but 15 is good. And what it'll do is, I thought you were going to say, how long does it affect the blood sugar? The blood sugar can be reduced, the peak will be considerably lower, and it will not, in other words, it won't go up. It keeps it from going as high, and it actually then when it comes down. So it makes your blood sugar more even. That's really important. Any other questions? Yes?
I usually walk fast before I eat my lunch, so should I do both? I walk fast before I eat my lunch and after my lunch stroll and I keep
Yeah, we typically say, June, that it's best not to exercise vigorously for an hour to 2 hours after a meal. Remember when I don't remember, I haven't heard this recently, but when I was growing up, we were always told that don't go in the swimming pool right after eating, okay, because you might have cramps or something. Anyway, and you don't hear a lot about that these days, but we're still made the same way. It still has the same effect. So in a similar way, if you exercise vigorously, you can actually cause nausea. But even if you don't, you can have a delayed digestion because you're drawing the blood to your limbs. So we would usually say exercise at least a half hour before eating. Give yourself at least 30 minutes to recover from vigorous exercise before you eat. And then don't exercise vigorously until at least an hour and a half after eating. But the strolling, that's why I'm saying it's safe. You can do strolling. In fact, if you don't want to stroll, that's all right. You can just lay on the floor and move your limbs and do, these things like in the snow, right? When we were kids, we used to make angels. Anyway, I mean, just move your limbs. I think walking is the easiest way. I like to walk. Swing your arms is fine. Okay, any other questions? Very good.
something on your slide that I didn't know what it meant. HOMO.
Oh, my.
For the insulin
HOMA-IR. Yeah, HOMA-IR we call it. So that's homeostasis, HOMA-IR. HOMA-IR.
What's the homa thing?
So that's homeostasis model of assessment. Homeostasis model of assessment of insulin resistance. Yeah, let me go back here because since you've asked that question, it gives me a chance to say something I wanted to say. Wow. Okay. Yeah, there it was. So the HOMA, let me explain to you. I'm nerdy, and it might be useful, especially if you know anybody that's diabetic. So homeostasis model of assessment is a value. It's a blood test, basically. It actually requires 2 blood tests. You have to do it at the same time. If you take the fasting glucose and the fasting insulin from the same blood sample, so you've measured both of those things at the same time. So from that, there's a formula that they use, and they calculate this thing called homeostasis model of assessment, insulin resistance, and that is a measure of how much resistance there is in your body to insulin. So the more resistance your body has, what do you know you need? Need more insulin to keep the blood sugar in a healthy number. If you don't have more insulin, what will happen? Blood sugar will go up. So who cares about that? Why is that a problem? Well, and I've known diabetics that didn't understand this, but high glucose has numerous ill effects. One of the key ones is it's actually neurotoxic. It actually can injure neurons. That's why you get this diabetic neuropathy. You have these things where most people it happens in the legs first or the feet, and in fact, the reason that people that have this neuropathy, they typically will walk funny, right? They walk so that they flat-footed, I call it. Anyway, you can't feel their feet. In fact, there was a guy that I know that came to a lifestyle program, and he was a heavy equipment operator, and he couldn't work because he couldn't judge the pressure he was putting on the pedals, and his hands were numb. He couldn't feel. He couldn't operate equipment like he had. He went through a lifestyle program and got his feeling back, and he was able to go back to work. He was like thrilled to death. Not everybody that has neuropathy will have a complete reversal. So glucose is toxic to many things. It's toxic to nerves. It actually it attaches to the red blood cells in your body. In fact, the hemoglobin A1C is based on the amount of glucose that's attached to your red blood cell. And so, and when it attaches to the red blood cell, it makes it less effective, and it makes it sticky. And so the red blood cells will actually stick to each other and form these long, like bagels, like a bunch of bagels all stacked up, or a loaf of bread. And so what do you know? The surface area of a loaf of bread that's all stacked up versus the surface area of a loaf of bread that's all put out separate slices. Which one has more surface area? Of course, the one with the slices. So when your red blood cells are all caked together, they can't function. They cannot exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide, and so you have ischemia. And what do we call it? Ischemic heart disease. So diabetes can cause ischemic heart disease, among other things. It can most of the damage is done in the tiny vessels. So where in your body are most of the tiny vessels? Eyes, ears, kidneys. So that's why you have diabetic retinopathy. You have diabetic nephropathy. You have, yeah. In fact, that's really bad, right? Because you can end up having to have dialysis because diabetes can destroy.
I have a question. If you are a well-controlled diabetes, how does that help you as far as fighting COVID-19, or how is that beneficial in
Great.
regards to that?
That's a great question. I should have answered that earlier. Should have been more explicit. So, the reason that the reason that controlling your diabetes is a way of reducing your risk of COVID is because of two things. One, we know that the severity of the infection is directly related to the presence of diabetes, heart disease, etc. But the other way is that we know when you make the lifestyle changes that reduce your glucose, you're changing something else. See, make me proud. What else? Switches. Who said that? Yes. You're changing gene switches that are improving your immune system's ability to do what? To have an adaptive immune response, which is the exact thing you need to fight COVID. So you're getting two benefits. You're getting indirect benefit from the diabetes, but you're getting a direct benefit from what's happening to your immune system. Now, tomorrow afternoon, I'm going to talk to you about something you can do besides diet that will actually strengthen the exact part of your immune system that's affected by COVID. It's treatments. I'll tell you about treatment that research has shown you can do. So not only changing your lifestyle, but some other things. Did I see another hand? Okay, we'll go here and then we can. Yes. Well, yeah. Okay, so these are good questions. All right, first off, the reason this is a percent is because this is percent change. So this is saying that the change was 6.4% change. But to answer, but it's a very good question, very interesting question. Look here, though. No, this isn't the one that has it. Let me go back just a bit further. There's another set of data. Yeah. So here, if we look at the people who had 110 or greater in this sample, notice what happened. They had a 39. That was their milligrams per deciliter, 25% drop. So the worse your sugar is, the more the improvement is produced. I just wanted to clarify that. Yeah, the other one that was a percent because it's a percent change. All right. However, when the A1C, the hemoglobin A1C, is a measure of the amount of glucose that's attached to the red blood cell. Red blood cells only live about 100 days or so, okay? Your red blood cells, I don't know if you know this or not, some of you do, but when your red blood cell is made, where is it produced? In the bone marrow. When it leaves the bone marrow, it has to leave something behind. It gets squeezed out through the tissue in the bone marrow, and the nucleus in the cell pops out. The red blood cells that are circulating in our body do not have a nucleus. They cannot make messenger RNA. They cannot repair themselves. They are basically doomed. And they live about 100 to 120 days, and they get old enough that the spleen or the liver take them out of circulation. And so, when I look at your glucose on your red blood cell, I'm actually looking at the amount of glucose that's been in your body over the last 100 days or so, right? So that's why I can. But the other test that we use is fasting blood sugar, fasting serum glucose. This is actually looking at the amount of glucose, which is what I was showing here. This is the actual average beginning number was 106, and it dropped to 96.2. Okay, in this group. But those who were pre-diabetic or diabetic, those higher, started at 156, and they dropped to 116. So, we have done we did, I don't show it here, but in the Marshall Islands, we actually did some hemoglobin A1C tests at 2 weeks. It was an accident. We hadn't planned to do it. The lab made a mistake. But anyway, out of that mistake, we found out that you can have a significant improvement in your hemoglobin A1C in 2 weeks, even though it's, yes, with lifestyle change. Because it's it's complicated. But anyway, we understand why that happens. I don't regularly do a hemoglobin A1C more frequently than a month or two. Okay, did that answer, or was there a second part of that question I didn't answer?
Well, my other thing was, I have a couple of friends that are diabetics, and I'm just looking at my own baby, and she's on, out partly, but, and the information he was given there on the spot was
Yeah, well, the reason that typically they want you to have plenty of protein is essential for tissue production. Okay, so after you've had a serious surgery or some, whatever, there's this emphasis, and especially in elderly people. I don't know how old your friend is, but in elderly people, the absorption of protein in your diet is not as high, as good as it is when you're younger, and so they want you to have plenty of protein in your diet so that you absorb enough to be able to rebuild tissue. And that's understandable. But, as probably you know this, but anyway, the research shows that Americans, we are getting too much protein. In fact, you don't probably need to recommend anybody except maybe an old, skinny, stay-at-home widower who's eating milk toast. He probably needs to be encouraged to get more protein, because milk toast will not provide adequate nutrients. But the average person, even somebody that's eating at a fast food place, is getting way more protein than they need. Yeah. But it is true, you have to have protein to rebuild after surgery or anything like that. Now that's strange, because sweet potatoes generally don't do that. White potatoes do. Yeah, but everybody's individual. I mean, we've learned that from the research I've done. Is that, and he may very well be someone but for the average person, sweet potato does not raise their sugar as much as white potato or corn, some of those other foods. Yes, so he was saying, what about white rice versus brown rice? And I can tell you on the actual true experience I had, I mean, everybody knows that whole food is healthier than refined food, and brown rice is less refined or unrefined compared to white rice. So we went to the Marshall Islands, and half the population, I said, is pre-diabetic or diabetic. And I went into the grocery store, and I thought, well, no wonder. I mean, in the grocery store there in the capital city, there was an aisle about as big as this aisle right here, and it was pallets stacked with white rice. They eat white rice. The average, they say, is about 2 cups per person per meal. So we thought, wow, this is wonderful. I thought, this is wonderful. We'll get them to eat brown rice, right? And so what we got some brown rice, and guess what? The type that they eat there, Caloros, the glycemic index, which is a measure of how much the food raises your blood sugar, the glycemic index for brown Caloros rice is higher than table sugar. They could eat table sugar, and it wouldn't raise their blood sugar as much as brown Caloros rice, and they were eating white. So, I mean, it was just, no wonder. So what did we teach them to eat? We taught them to eat sugar, barley and oats, barley and oats. And they work really well. But, of course, but you know what? The people, after we did our study and we did follow-up questionnaires. We were asking people, the ones that had done really, really well, reversed their diabetes. I mean, we literally had people that their A1C went from off the chart, the lab didn't know how high it was. It was just over 14, but that's all they know, to a normal 6 or below 6. And so what did you do? Joey, do you mind we would like you to just tell us, what changes did you make? I mean, what do you eat for breakfast? And so you say, well, me and the wife, and these were school teachers, so they were, more fairly educated people. So they said, well, we really have gotten in the habit of eating oatmeal for breakfast. So we have oatmeal and some fruit, and maybe some coconut, and we taught them to eat coconut, which they like. It's not coconut oil, okay? Anyway, and says, okay. And so, okay, so what do you eat for lunch? Says, well, we usually have oatmeal and some, different fruit. Anyway, and you get so what do you have for supper? Well, we have oatmeal. Well, to me we smile and laugh, but what were they eating before? Every meal they were eating rice. Yeah. And to me, I thought, well, that sounds boring, but actually they made it interesting. They did different things with it, and we taught them different ways to eat oatmeal, by the way. So did you know that you can make waffles out of oatmeal? Yeah. So you can have waffles for breakfast. It's actually just oatmeal. You can have waffles with oat burgers for lunch, and so that's oatmeal waffle with an oat burger. I mean, you could, and for supper. Anyway, you get the idea. So, but the ones that did the best were the ones that adopted barley and oats and avoided the rice. They did, and the chicken. They used to, the big thing they ate was white rice and chicken. And we encouraged them to avoid chicken, but they live on an island. And so we encouraged them to eat fish. But what's the better kind of fish? Do you know? Yeah, clean, but it's the deep water. The deep water fish are healthier than the shallow water. And of course, I don't think they had cod because in the Marshall, they live on like a coral-based thing, and it drops off. I mean, it's very deep, so they don't get cod, but they do have tuna and other kinds of big fish that they can get. Anyway, well, there's 1 or 2 minutes left. Appreciate the questions and the engagement. And so let me, do you want to share just briefly, Barbara, what you're going to talk about? And I'm going to tell them what I'm going to talk about because I want them to all come back, bring their friends. Well, come up here.
Well, I'll be right back.
Okay. So, okay, you're going to do it.
I will not be as sophisticated in the scientific delivery, but what I'm going to be talking about tomorrow.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Tomorrow the talk is going to be at 2 o'clock that I'm going to be giving, and it's called What Everybody Needs for Health. And the 4 Health is an acronym, and it's going to be the 9 natural healing agencies that God created right from the start at Eden. They're still available, they're still at hand, they're still what everybody needs, and they're exactly what everybody needed for health when God first created human beings. So that's what I'm going to be talking about at 2.
Thank you.
Actually, there's one thing missing: the tree of life. We don't have that.
Yeah, so
a big one.
I'm going to, in the morning at 11, I'll be sharing with you a message about the question. I'm going to be answering from the scriptures and from inspiration this question: why don't we see more healing in our time like Jesus and the disciples saw in their time? And I know that's a risky question to address, but I'm comfortable that I know the answer from the scriptures, and I'm going to share it with you and see if you don't agree. Then Barbara's going to have, after I understand we have a box lunch of some kind, then Barbara's going to give her presentation, And then at 4, I'll be giving my last presentation. And as I say, it's going to be about simple remedies besides lifestyle that you can use to treat and save people who have COVID. We've got actual evidence that we'll talk about, show you, published evidence of using some simple hydrotherapy and other treatments specifically for viral disease, and great results. Okay, so thank you much. So you have prayer.
What do y'all think? When it's fantastic? Let's give Dr. Kelly a big hand. This was very informative. And I want to let you know that I've been to a first dinner when one of the lifestyle changes started in Florida. This is years ago. And I went to their graduation supper 21 days later, and fantastic testimonies, impossible testimonies. I've worked in our hospitals in Florida, at least one of them, and when I would share what I saw at the Lifestyle Center, the doctors and nurses at our hospital didn't believe it. They really didn't believe it. You can't do that. You can't go from taking 60-some units of insulin a day and not be able to walk from here to that pew and in 21 days be off insulin completely and have walked 30-some miles and feeling great. I mean, they just said the body doesn't recover that fast. And I said, well, I saw the guy. I saw him when I got there, and I saw him when he graduated. And it happened. So, I consider this stuff ancient cutting-edge technology. We've had it for years and years, and we haven't used it. We haven't made ourselves available. Seventh-day Adventists should be much healthier than we are. And the mainly thing is our lifestyle. That's the main thing we can look at. So, I encourage all of you, come back tomorrow. If you've been watching online, or bring a friend. If you're watching online, tune in, tell your friends about it, especially the ones that need to hear this. The ones that are not feeling good, that have no energy, that have diabetes, that have heart problems, and all those things that are making their life miserable. Why go through 10 years of being miserable when you could live 20 years feeling great? Really, I think it was a wonderful program. Looking forward to tomorrow. And I'd like to invite all of us, why don't we all stand and close this with a word of prayer. It's just amazing what God has given us, and it's amazing that we don't avail ourselves more of it. Let's bow our heads. Most gracious Heavenly Father, you are so good to us. You've made so many things available within our reach. Not something hard, something easy. But Lord, we seem to want to do things our way. Father, thank you for this time together this evening. We look forward to tomorrow. We ask, Lord, that you would lead and guide everyone that needs to hear this message to either be here or be able to tune in. And help us all, Lord, to live a happy, healthier life in you. For in Jesus' name, we thank you, Father. Amen. God bless you all. Look forward to seeing you 11 o'clock tomorrow, and then at 2 and 4. Thank you.